1969, Doctor Who was dying. Script problems on stories like The Dominators were threatening to tear the series apart. Patrick Troughton, exhausted by the heavy film schedule, made the 6th season of Doctor Who his final one. The viewing figures had begun to slide as well. The War Games had reached new lows of 3.5 million viewers. Now, hoping to survive into the 1970s, the following year would have resulted in the biggest changeover the series had ever faced. Though things were far from clear, the BBC were even looking for a replacement show for the Saturday night slot, but they were unable to find one and decided to give Doctor Who one more season. Can you imagine if they did? I probably wouldn't be here right now. Under the watch of producer Peter Bryant and Derek Sherwin, they took influence from earlier Patrick Troughton stories, The Web of Fear and The Invasion. Script editor / producer Derek Sherwin created UNIT, United Nations Intelligence Task Force, in order to expand the supporting cast in the hope that this would take away the strain from the lead actor from having to learn all those lines. However, this series would be the shortest that Doctor Who had ever had at this point, reducing the episode count from 45 a year to 25 episodes a year. With the new format in place, scriptwriter Robert Holmes was asked to pitch an idea of meteorites falling to Earth that contained intelligence that would need a humanoid form to take over the Earth. This idea was based on a pitch that Robert Holmes submitted for the 1965 film Invasion, which coincidentally also featured an alien crashing into the woods near a rural hospital, where a medical examination reveals his alien nature and the hospital is visited by other aliens seeking a fugitive criminal. For the new Doctor, Ron Moody was Peter Bryant's first choice. Yes, this Ron Moody.
I'm reviewing the situation.
Can you imagine that? Fagin playing the Doctor? That would have been pretty awesome. However, Ron Moody wasn't interested in the role, but later says that he deeply regrets turning down the role. Their second choice was Jon Pertwee, but they were a bit concerned due to his background in radio comedy, particularly on the programme The Navy Lark. However, one of his co-stars, Tenniel Evans, suggested that he put himself up for the role, but Pertwee himself wasn't so sure. Head of drama Sean Sutton took Pertwee out to lunch twice, hoping to convince him of playing the Doctor, but then they settled on dinner, where Sutton revealed that he wanted Jon Pertwee for the role. John's response was allegedly, "Who the hell is Jon Pertwee? I've never played him before." Eventually, Pertwee accepted and hoped to play the role that the children would believe in, but be straight enough so that the adults would be invested as well. Filming commenced in a local plastics factory, and outside Unit HQ in episode 2, the guard you see was played by producer Derek Sherwin. Sherwin had to replace the young actor who was unable to, act. Tip if you're going into this industry, even if your role is very small, know what you're doing. Derek Sherwin then played the part of the guard completely unpaid. The scenes where the Autons attacked the public were filmed in Ealing, but they couldn't afford for the Autons to break the shop window itself. Luckily they fixed this for the new series. Industrial action by the BBC meant that this serial had to be filmed entirely on location, as studio space was unavailable at the time, and this became the only Doctor Who story of the classic series to be shot entirely on film, and for the first time in colour. When filming concluded, producer Peter Bryant was called in to produce Paul Temple, and due to the scripting issues, he had to take Derek Sherwin with him. Former actor and director Barry Letts was hurriedly called in as producer and would remain in this position for the remainder of the Jon Pertwee era. You know, with all these massive changes in front of and behind the cameras, I'm so relieved that the internet didn't exist in 1970. So, let me get this right. Doctor Who is now going to be set entirely on Earth and in colour. I mean, this completely, and I mean completely, goes against everything Doctor Who stood for. What happened to travelling in time for escapism? Everything's set on Earth now. I don't want to be reminded of the real world. I watch Doctor Who for entertainment and escapism. And they're hiring comedy actor Jon Pertwee to play the Doctor. He's never done serious roles before. I mean, what next? Are they going to cast a well-known comedian to play the companion next? Ugh, that'd be so bad. Maybe he has done straight acting before, but I won't bother to look it up because I know I'm right. And they've got hack writer Robert Holmes for the opening story. He's yet to write anything good for the series, evident from last year. I mean, maybe he could improve for the next series, but I'm judging him before he writes anything for the new series because I have a huge persecution complex. And with the episode count now being cut down and Derek Sherwin now leaving the series, mark my words folks, Doctor Who is going to be cancelled any day now. In the year of our Lord 1970, Doctor Who is nothing more than an agenda pushing against time travel. I mean, there is just so much here for me to pretend to be angry about. Now with all the what-ifs and the production history out of the way, let's look at the story. Exiled to Earth in the 20th century, the newly regenerated Doctor arrives in Oakley Woods accompanied by a meteorite shower. Unit is soon put into action when people and meteorites begin going missing, with the new Doctor joining forces with Dr. Liz Shaw and Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart. Remnants of a living plastic creature known as the Nestine Consciousness plans to conquer the Earth by substituting Auton replicas for men and women in key government and military posts. Only the Doctor, Liz Shaw and Unit can stop it. Spearhead from Space is one of the most important stories in Doctor Who's long history and was the biggest changeover the series had ever gone through until it came back in 2005. This is the only time in the classic series that they begin a new era with more or less a clean slate. No characters from past adventures appear here, I mean aside from the Brigadier, but everything just feels new. And in my opinion, Spearhead from Space brings Doctor Who back with a bang, and this new era is off to a flying colour start. See what I did there? A lot of this I do think is down to Jon Pertwee's performance, and I'll admit, in episode 1, it was quite gutsy of them to not show the Doctor right away. We don't see his face until nearly the end of episode 1. We see him fall out of the TARDIS and then we hear him groan in the hospital bed, before finally showing his face to the Brigadier when he goes to visit. Think of it this way, at the end of the War Games we're more or less following the Doctor in his exile, but now with a new Doctor he spends most of the first episode in bed. Plus the first cliffhanger is him being shot by one of the guards. Can you imagine if he actually regenerated there and then? Luckily, Pertwee more than proves himself in his debut and gives us a dashing, confident, gadget-mad protagonist who you definitely want to follow. His costume is also great. He dresses like an upper-class gentleman and like a member of the establishment, but in subsequent stories he would prove to be a completely anti-establishment figure. I personally feel that the costume shows that this Doctor wants to look good, but he doesn't care about what time zone he's in, so he will wear whatever looks cool to him. After escaping the hospital, he takes more of a commanding presence in the story, and I'd say that my Jon Pertwee moment of the week was his scene between him and the guard outside Unit HQ. He pretty much tells the guard, who doesn't even get to say a word, that he's in charge and wants to see Lethbridge Stewart. He doesn't have a pass, but he's getting into that building anyway. I buy this right away. It shows that this Doctor isn't messing around, and you don't deny for a second that he's in charge, and the most knowledgeable person in the room whenever he enters. Other great moments include him trying to convince Hibbert that Channing is his enemy and he also must resist him. Also, the scene of him escaping the hospital is pretty great. I love the shower scene. Plus, on a side note, is this the first time we see the Doctor's nipples on screen? Even the moment when he looks at the sign on the door and sees it's for Doctors Only and enters is just perfect. Something tells me that this scene was written to show off Pertwee's comedic range, but I don't mind that at all. Another fun fact for you about the Doctor in this story is that this was the first ever serial to reveal that the Doctor has two hearts. Shaw, played by Caroline John, also makes her debut here, and she definitely proves herself worthy to be a companion. Liz Shaw is a stark contrast to companions we got in the 60s, as she doesn't really scream for help or ask a lot of questions. She's a real scientist whose wits and cleverness can rival even that of the Doctor's. And what I like about the Doctor and Liz's relationship is that they feel like equals. They both have a love and knowledge and understanding for science. She even helps the Doctor defeat the Nestine in the climax of the episode, rather than scream for help or twist her ankle. There is initial conflict between her and the Brigadier, as she is brought down from Cambridge against her will, and they need her assistance. She's reluctant at first, but after seeing the Autons and the Nestine, she realises that this is serious and the Earth is very vulnerable to attack, so agrees to help. The Brigadier is also a welcome return, played excellently by the irreplaceable Nicholas Courtney. Of all the characters they brought back for the new series, I am glad it was this one. I do like how initially he thinks he knows everything when he hears reports on an alien and a police box, but the realisation that the Doctor can change his appearance opens his eyes a lot more. Not everything is now as simple as it seems. He's now working with a man who can change his appearance, and that the enemy itself is very close to home. Everything is now not as black and white as it all seems. See what I did there? But he also gets to be a great man of action when he fights the Autons at the factory towards the end. Courtney is such a great action star, and I'm almost sad that the Brigadier and unit didn't get their own spin-off with him as the lead. The Autons and the Nestines are a great new monster for this new era of Doctor Who. With the new leads, the audience initially doesn't have someone relatable to latch onto because they're all new, except maybe the Brigadier. But I think that they could latch onto the concept of shop window dummies coming to life, because it's something so relatable that people see every day, and would hopefully encourage any new audiences to watch. It may sound like I'm repeating myself a bit here from Rose, but it's not my fault. Both stories are similar, so kind of work with me here. The look of the Autons is also brilliant. They have no expression yet look so smooth and shiny. The artificialness of the plastic texture really adds to their creepiness. Similar to the Cybermen, their eyes and faces are blank, but it adds so much to the creepiness. They initially look harmless enough, but the reveal that they have a gun hidden inside their hands is a chilling reveal. I also have to mention the most iconic scene of the serial when they come to life in shop window dummies and begin killing civilians. Just amazing. Not only is the scene shot beautifully, but it just shows how unstoppable these creatures are. Nothing can stop them. They move more smoothly than their 2005 successors and counterparts, but they're still very effective. Plus, episode 3 of this story marks the first time that a monster in Doctor Who is seen inside somebody's home, when it's looking for the Nestine energy unit. The more you know. Where I think they fall short is the realisation of the Nestine itself. The tentacles aren't entirely convincing, and Pertwee's gurning in the scene certainly doesn't help. Which is a shame, as it's meant to be the climax of the episode, but that's where it falls flat for me. The supporting cast are also pretty good, and for me the best two characters in this are probably Sam Seeley and his wife Meg. They're both examples of Holmes' characterisation, who I think in later years would become almost flawless at it, giving us some great memorable characters. You get the sense that the years of living together, they get on each other's nerves, particularly with Meg, who's sick of Sam bringing home crap from the woods. Though when you think about it, Sam bringing back the meteorite results in his house being ransacked and his wife attacked by an Auton. Is that a dig at poachers that hunt and scavenge? Hugh Burden as Channing is pretty chilling and creepy. Like the Autons, his expression never changes, but it's still a very creepy performance, as when he orders Ransom's death, not only does he order the Auton to kill him, but have his body completely vanish. It shows how ruthless the Nestines are and how far they'll go in their objectives. Hibbert, played by John Woodnutt, is an example of fighting against a big corporation. The Doctor tries to convince him that he must resist Channing and break away from this huge company. First story in colour, and there's already digs at big businesses. And like big businesses, they'll remove anyone from existence who disagrees with them. Ransom's fear at the Autons is very well played as well. It keeps the stakes and fear of the Nestines high, and his death proves that they must be stopped no matter what. Production-wise, this episode gets off to a great start due to the industrial action. Everything was shot on film and on location, and Doctor Who has never looked better. The fact that they used real locations just makes everything seem enormous, and the way the streets and forest scenes are shot just make it all seem so much closer to home for the viewers. The industrial look of the factory is great as well, dirty and rustic. Obviously a lair for an evil villain, but a great looking one nonetheless. I particularly love the way the Autons are filmed, definitely at the end of episode 2 when Ransom doesn't notice one move behind him, but we the audience do, and it's so chilling, shot at a wide angle lens and coming slowly towards him. The POV shot used for the Jeep crash is also pretty effective, and a cheap way to not actually get a Jeep crashing, but it really adds to the disorientation that the soldiers feel when inside the Jeep. The way the aftermath is shot is also pretty horrific as well. We see the driver's head crashed through the windscreen and blood down his face, but it works in the story's favour, as it's not just there to show, lol, look how dark we are, but to show how real this threat is to the Earth. Just great stuff, I think. The music by Dudley Simpson is also very effective. While it can be pretty repetitive in areas, it still hits the right notes, and I love the Auton theme when they appear. Plus the music disappears when one of them is deactivated near the end. That's a nice touch. What I like about this music is that you can never really tell if it's sound effects or music, and while I can understand if it's too disorientating for some audiences, me personally, I'm all for that type of music. So, in conclusion, Spearhead from Space is an excellently paced, wonderfully shot, confidently performed serial that still holds up today, nearly 50 years later. Yes, nearly 50 years. We're getting old, guys. John Pertwee is a great new Doctor, Liz Shaw is an equally competent companion, the Brigadier and unit are great new additions, and the villains are simple but very effective. With all these elements performed with such excellence, Doctor Who's new era in colour and the 1970s was now well and truly secured. In the summer of 1969, script editor Terrance Dicks approached former colleague of his, Malcolm Hulke, seeking new story ideas for John Pertwee's Third Doctor. Malcolm Hulke was initially reluctant to write a new script for the new format, as producers Peter Bryant and Derek Sherwin had reformatted Doctor Who in such a way that it was now effectively earthbound, and Hulke feared that this restricted the programme to adventures involving either alien invasions or mad scientists. Nonetheless, Malcolm Hulke decided to try and prove himself wrong and developed an idea about a race of creatures who would be revealed as having inhabited the Earth millions of years before mankind even evolved. On June 15, 1969, Terrance Dicks commissioned the 6-part serial from Hulke under the title of The Monsters. The story then gained a less generic name in The Silurians, and an extra episode was added around the time its scripts were greenlighted on August 11th. To this point, Hulke's adventure was intended to be the third serial of Season 7, coming after David Whittaker's The Ambassadors of Death. But when that story hit severe scripting difficulties, Terrance elected to transpose the two in the running order, moving the Silurians up to second in production. Filming began on the Silurians a week late due to the industrial action that had affected Spearhead from Space to be recorded entirely outside the studio. Consequently, filming began on November 12th at locations in Marylebone and Shepherd's Bush, London, for the sequence in episode 6 where the Ill Masters arrives in the city and the plague starts to affect the whole population. The next 2 days were spent at Sheep Hatch Farm in Tilford, Surrey, which served as Squire's Farm. Publicity shots were also taken around this time of Bessie, the Doctor's new car, which made its debut in this story. Bessie was suggested to outgoing producer Peter Bryant by John Pertwee and assistant script editor Trevor Ray. Bessie was built in the style of an Edwardian roadster and bore a fake license plate reading Who Won. Because of John Pertwee's love for cars, it was his idea to bring Bessie into the series. After a break for the weekend, work resumed on the 17th and 18th at Hankley Common in Rushmore, Surrey, filling in for Wenley Moore. Wenley Hospital was actually Milford Chest Hospital in Milford, Surrey. Scenes there were filmed on November 19th. Finally, 2 more Surrey locations, the High Street in Godalming and the Hogback Transmitter Station in Guildford, played host to several scenes on the 20th of November. Amongst these were the sequences where the Doctor watches unit blow up the Silurian caves, a scene that was added by Terrance Dicks at Barry Letz's request. Barry Letts had discovered from audience research reports that more than half of Doctor Who's viewers were now adults, and therefore sought to orient the programme in a more mature direction. Unfortunately, the filming of the explosion didn't go as planned, and a small grass fire was ignited instead, forcing Trevor Ray to explain the mishap to the local fire department, who had actually believed that a fire had gone off on the fields. Director Timothy Combe had contemplated visiting Wookey Hole for the cave scenes in Somerset. However, it soon became clear that this would not be logistically feasible, and so Timothy Combe elected to move those sequences into the studio. Now, unfortunately, this led to even more difficulties when designer Barry Newbury discovered that the outside contractors he had hired to build the cave set had made the walls far too flimsy to stand erect. As a result, it was decided to abandon Doctor Who's usual pattern of taping all the scenes for 1 episode each week. In a break with tradition, the story's title was given as Doctor Who and the Silurians. Although this was the style used on most Doctor Who scripts to this point, the Doctor Who and prefix had always been omitted from the title given on screen. Now, to avoid a recurrence of this error in the future, the prefix was largely dropped from subsequent scripts, hence why we have the title of the story be Doctor Who and the Silurians. Producer Barry Letts felt that the usual 1 week, 1 episode pattern was now an inefficient method to film Doctor Who, and instead he thought that it might be better to tape 2 instalments together on a bi-weekly basis, since the sets could then be left up overnight, and this would reduce the amount of damage they incurred from being taken down and put back up again the next day. The story also included the first use of colour separation overlay. known as CSO, or, for what we know now today, green screen. This was a new electronic effect in which elements of the image from one camera replaced areas of the image from a second camera which were keyed to a specific colour, either blue, green or yellow. Tests for this technique had been held as far back as August 6, and Barry Letts decided to use it as he saw enormous potential in its use. With all the production out of the way, let's look at the story. UNIT is called in when a nuclear reactor on Wenley Moor starts experiencing strange power losses. The Doctor discovers that the activation of the reactor has accidentally awakened the Earth's original civilized inhabitants, the reptilian Silurians, who have lain in suspended animation underground for millennia. Now the Silurians wish to reclaim the planet for themselves and unleash a deadly virus that will engulf mankind and destroy them. Now, we're only 2 stories into this Earthbound format, and already Malcolm Hulke is attempting to break away from this restrictive formula, because when you think about it, setting Doctor Who entirely on Earth only gives you 2 types of stories, mad scientist or alien invasion. Now this subverts that story style and has the enemy be not from another planet, but from underneath the Earth itself, and from the Silurians' point of view, mankind is the invader, not them. Malcolm Hulke's script is filled with such subtext that keeps the story interesting across 7 episodes. Furthermore, he keeps the story focused, but introduces new elements into each individual episode to keep the story fresh and moving forward. Each episode has its own mini subplot when you think about it. Episode 1 is investigating the power losses, Episode 2 looking in the caves, Episode 3 hunting for the wounded Silurian, Episode 4 investigating their base, Episode 5 negotiations between the Doctor and the Silurians, Episode 6 battling the plague, and Episode 7 an invasion of the Silurians to the research centre. Now this makes Doctor Who and the Silurians one of those stories that's pretty easy to watch all in one go, I think. So if you ever have to write something that's nearly 3 hours long, my advice would be watch this story if you want to keep the audience's interest, because in my opinion it succeeds with flying colours. Jon Pertwee continues to shine in this story, and in my opinion we're introduced to a Doctor who stands as the middleman between 2 species. The third Doctor doesn't seem as black and white as his 2 predecessors, and not just because he's in colour now, but he's out looking for a solution that could suit both sides. The last thing the Doctor wants here is a massacre and a terrible war that will result in either one's genocide. And my Jon Pertwee moment of the week is his scene in episode 5 with the Silurian leader. Major Baker, who is also held prisoner, is shouting how much of a traitor he is for telling the Silurians information about mankind. The look on Pertwee's face almost shows doubt about what he's doing, because at this point in the story, humans and Silurians have been attacked on both sides, and while the Doctor still thinks that peace is the best option, there is still vulnerability in his face because of the preceding events. However, he still presses on with his objective and even manages to persuade the Silurian leader that peace is the best option. The entire scene sums up the Doctor's character in my opinion, a bridge between 2 species who's always looking out for the best possible solution. I also love the scene where he first meets a Silurian in Quinn's cottage. He's aware that this reptile has attacked people, but understand that it's just most likely scared and just attacking in self-defense. The way he says hello and reaches his hand out in peace, speaking slowly and with compassion, it doesn't feel out of place at all, and Pertwee just sells the hell out of it. Doctor Who and the Silurians is where the third Doctor's character is born for me, dressing like a lord or member of the establishment but being completely against the system. An example of him being kind of against the system is that he doesn't want the Brigadier and UNIT to invade the caves. His mere existence and knowledge of things beyond human understanding antagonises Dr. Lawrence, the leader of the research centre, and if the Doctor succeeded, he could have changed history as we know it. It's ironic when you think about it, as this is why he was sent to Earth in the first place, because of his interference. Pertwee has mastered the role completely here in my opinion, and he exhibits the right mix of logic, arrogance, but also compassion that characterises the third Doctor, who is at the top of his game in this story. Liz Shaw also continues to be a good companion for the Doctor, and manages to make serious scientific contributions to the story, such as analysing the blood sample that was found in the caves, searching the barn for forensic analysis, and helping the Doctor find a cure for the plague. While she does get the classic companion scream when the Silurian attacks her, she doesn't become scared or quiver with fear. She's completely cool about it and realises bigger things are at stake and we need to move on from this. She feels like such an equal to the Doctor. If something bad happens, she doesn't panic, she just takes it in her stride and moves on to help create the best solution that we can. The Brigadier, played by Nicholas Courtney, is also on top form here, and completely cold as he can get, and feels like a force to be reckoned with. This is only his second story with the third Doctor, but there's already conflict between the two, but you equally see his point of view when he regards the Silurians. He loses many men to them, and even nearly suffocates when they trap him and his men in the caves. While the Doctor is angry that the Brigadier blew up their base at the end, you can see where the Brigadier was coming from. Good people and soldiers died, and he can't risk the Silurians waking up again and causing havoc. The Doctor does criticise him for speaking like a soldier, but you can't really fault the Brigadier for that, because the man is a trained killer, and it's his job to think like a soldier and strategise. Nicholas Courtney completely owns this character, and I personally feel that Season 7 was the character and the actor's best series, as the Brigadier kind of became a comical figure in later years, but here I think they mixed just the right balance. There was definitely a respect for the Doctor, but there was also the Brigadier's own interests and authority that he had to answer to, which the Doctor on Earth doesn't have an authority to answer to, but the Brigadier is kind of the one to rein him in on that. The Silurians as villains basically sum up the story as a whole. Beneath the surface, they're not as black and white as everything may seem. The old and young Silurian reflect both the Doctor and the Brigadier's characters. Both of them argue over leadership and the idea of peace. The old Silurian almost goes through the same arc as the Doctor does in this story, wary of the other side that he views as invaders, but is willing to have peace between the two species. The young Silurian is also practically the Brigadier, seeing the harm what both species can do with each other, and thinks that one should be wiped out before the other does first. Shoot first and ask questions later. We even see that despite the old Silurian proclaiming he is the leader and makes the decisions for his tribe, it proves to be his downfall as the young Silurian kills him. It shows that the leader is not stronger than the whole tribe, and the vocal majority outweigh the peaceful minority. Though even when the young Silurian becomes leader, he still has to reinforce his ideals through fear by shouting at his two subordinates and reminding them of his power. The Silurian voices by Peter Halliday are also pretty good. They sound distinctively alien and reptilian, but human enough that you can sympathise with them. And while I think the costumes are a bit rubbery at times, they're kept mostly in dimly lit light, so it's not that big of a problem when it comes to their appearance. I think also the Silurians represent the idea that aliens in Doctor Who can be good. While you can't really have a good Cyberman or a good Dalek, the Silurians represent the idea that there can be peace between two coexisting species, and not to judge a book by their covers. Unlike the Daleks or Cybermen that will kill or convert anything they see, the Silurians will only attack in self-defense, making them much more complex than a lot of other Doctor Who monsters at the time, and you almost feel sad that peace was unable to be made, as the worst of both sides were the ones that were mostly present and won the day in the end. The supporting cast in this story are also really good. Peter Miles makes the first of his 3 Doctor Who appearances as Dr. Lawrence, and I think his breakdown across the serial is very well portrayed, and it's very natural. His main concern isn't with the safety of his staff, but how well the research centre is running. Despite thinking more like a computer and a machine and wanting things to run to a schedule, he still feels fear and anger. He becomes more and more paranoid at UNIT's interference as his power and authority is stripped away piece by piece until he reaches his breaking point in episode 6, when he succumbs to the Silurian plague. He blames everyone but himself, thinks that everyone has been out to discredit him and ruin his career, and even tries to physically throw the Brigadier out of his place, but his inability to listen is his downfall, and he dies of the plague. Peter Miles sells the hell out of this role, and while the pompous leader would become a trait of the Pertwee era, Dr. Lawrence definitely feels like one of the more complex and fully rounded of them. Fulton Mackay as Dr. Quinn is also really good, and he's not necessarily evil, but he's more misguided. He wants to know more about the Silurians and their civilization, and agrees to help find the wounded Silurian, but becomes too greedy and keeps the creature prisoner until they promise to give him the knowledge that he wanted. The Silurians even acknowledge how clever Quinn is, but his thirst for knowledge was his downfall. The promise of potential gain outweighed the risk of angering the Silurians, and he is killed by them. Despite only being in 3 of the 7 episodes, Fulton Mackay certainly makes an impact and the performance is really good. His relationship with Miss Dawson is also really well handled. She warns Quinn to tell someone about the discovery he's made, but he doesn't listen, and after he is killed, Miss Dawson is determined to see the Silurians wiped out. On first viewing, you might be confused as to why she'd want this extremity, but if you watch her scenes with Quinn again, you'll see that she did have affections for him and wanted him to talk because she cared for him, and Thomasine Highness sells the hell out of this role. She's really good. Norman Baker is also similar to the Brigadier, playing Major Baker, in that he'd rather shoot first before asking questions later, but his rashness is his downfall, as despite being injured he wants to fight them again. Kind of ironic when you think about it. He was the first to suggest war between the two species, and that the Silurians wanted to invade Earth and wipe out humanity, and he helped cause that. He became the first to be infected with their plague that spread to humanity, just like the idea of kill or be killed that he suggests to everyone. Finally, we have Jeffrey Palmer as Masters. No, not the Master, that's his surname. Anyway, Masters is quite similar to the Doctor in that he's brought in by the Ministry, a high authority, and the Doctor was sent here by the Time Lords, also a higher authority. But like the Doctor, Masters is the middleman between two ideals, scientist Dr. Lawrence and the military unit. And like the Doctor, he's unable to come up with a solution and is sadly killed by the plague. Despite his short and brief role, I feel Jeffrey Palmer gave a very good performance as Masters. From a production standpoint, this episode looks fantastic. The cave sets are pretty convincing, though I think that it would have looked a lot better had they actually gone to real caves like they suggested, but they still look good thanks to some very well realised lighting. There's some great shots that obscure the look of the Silurians early on in the story. The way the hand comes out on the surface and the sun silhouetting its body looks amazing. Furthermore, the Silurian point of view shots are very effective. The heavy breathing really helps as well, and you get the sense that this creature isn't out to kill or cause any malicious intent. It's just helpless and only looking for shelter after being wounded. The shots of the Moors look great as well, particularly when they hunt for the Silurian. It just looks so enormous and isolated. The montage of the plague affecting London is also really well handled. It adds to the chaos of it all, but also gives it a lot of scale. This is now a series that shows the viewer how close the danger is to home. Now, if I did have criticism of this story, it would be the dinosaur effect. While it's not as bad as the infamous Merker that we would get from Warriors of the Deep, it's still not a pretty strong effect. Luckily, it's not on screen for very long, and it's not hugely detrimental on the story, so I'll forgive it. The music by Kerry Blyton is also a problem for me. He makes use of a crumb horn, and sadly it sounds too unintentionally comical. It just doesn't fit the story at all and comes across as way too camp sounding. Now there are some tracks I do like, such as when we see Squire's farm in episode 2. It just sounds very tranquil and isolated, which makes sense as it's a farm and in a rural location. Though it kind of reminds me of the opening to Emmerdale a little. But when the Silurians appeared, the music sadly undermines their appearance. It just makes them sound comical rather than scary, and it's just really distracting and out of place for me. But aside from the music, production-wise, this episode is pretty top-notch and continues with Doctor Who's high standard of Series 7. So, to conclude, Doctor Who and the Silurians is a wonderfully dark, morally ambiguous story with great performances, well-rounded characters that's nicely shot with equally as complex monsters. The tone is bleak but never feels out of place, and the pacing is so good that you could watch this all in one go and never feel bored by it. While the music is sadly very out of place tone-wise, the direction definitely makes up for it with excellent atmosphere and scale. It's easily one of the Third Doctor's finest stories. The Ambassadors of Death originated after original script editor David Whittaker completed work on the Season 5 story The Enemy of the World in 1968. The current script editor Derek Sherwin approached Whittaker in 1968 to write a 6-part serial titled The Invaders from Mars, which detailed about humanity's present-day encounter with alien life forms. However, Terence Stiggs became the prominent script editor the following year, and whilst Sherwin had been promoted to producer, and the storyline was extended to 7 episodes, and now retitled The Carriers of Death. Companions of the 60s, Jamie and Zoe, were replaced with Liz Shaw and Unit, and was intended to be the second story of Season 7. Problems sadly arose when Whittaker submitted the first 2 episodes, and Sherwin felt that it was not what he was looking for. Assistant script editor Trevor Ray was given the task of rewriting episode 1 and gave it back to Whittaker as an idea of what the production team wanted. However, the work was put on hold as Whittaker and the writing team were unable to move forward with the story suitably. In mid-November 1969, agreements were made to have Whittaker deliver nothing beyond episode 3. Malcolm Hulke, who had recently completed the Silurians, was commissioned on November 18th to revise the delivered parts 2 and 3 and write the final 4 episodes, making changes to Whittaker's storyline when necessary. Despite the massive alterations, Whittaker would maintain writing credits throughout the serial, and to allow more time for the rewrites, it was decided to bump the Silurians up second in transmission and production, and the Carriers of Death now transmitted to be third. Filming commenced on January 23rd, 1970. 2 Buckinghamshire locations were used. The Little Marlow sewage works was the Isotope Factory, while the gravel pit was Folly Gravel's pit at Spade Oak. The Suffolk Gasworks in Middlesex served as the exterior for the Space Centre headquarters and was filmed on January 26th and 27th. The warehouse fight was filmed on the following days at TCC Condensers in Ealing. The retrieval of Recovery 7 was enacted at Aldershot, Hampshire on January 30th and 31st. At the same time, the serial's title was now The Ambassadors of Death, and studio taping began on February 13th. In contrast to the Silurians, Ambassadors employed the traditional studio schedule of completing 1 episode every 7 days. For episode 5, the production team decided to replace the scripted Sergeant West with John Levine as Sergeant Benton. Benton had been introduced as a corporal in The Invasion from Season 6 and had already been invited back for this story and the next one, Inferno, giving John Levine more of an acting job. The Ambassadors of Death was David Whittaker's final Doctor Who story, as well as being his final work for the BBC. While he was approached to adapt this story for the Target novelisation, it was a project he would never complete, and he sadly passed away in February 1980. The story starts with the Doctor and Unit investigating the mystery surrounding Mars Probe 7, as Space Control have had no contact with the probe since it started back from Mars 7 months ago. Sending a recovery probe, it also falls into trouble and returns to Earth with the astronauts missing. It soon becomes clear that the alien ambassadors have swapped places with the human astronauts. The Doctor makes a solo flight to Recovery 7 and docks with Mars Probe 7, but is intercepted by a huge alien spaceship and taken aboard, where he finds the human astronauts completely unharmed. The alien captain threatens to destroy the Earth unless their ambassadors are returned to them. Returning to the Earth, the Doctor discovers that the kidnapping of the ambassadors is part of a scheme devised by General Carrington in order to start a war between humanity and the alien species. While the story is credited to David Whittaker, it's very clear that Malcolm Hulke's trademarks as a writer are all over the script. As like the previous story, The Silurians, the serial isn't as black and white as everything may seem. Furthermore, it's also reflective of the style and tonal changes that Doctor Who was undergoing at the time, mixing the eccentric scientist who battles monsters and more or less blending it with the tone of a James Bond film. One of the serious ones, that is. The Ambassadors of Death definitely showcases this mix of genres, as there's OTT gunfights, fistfights, car chases, alien conspiracies, etc. And while I do think this is the weakest story of Season 7, but that's not to say that this is a bad story. It's got a lot going on, but also not much going on. Jon Pertwee is still a marvel to watch as the Doctor, but I think in this story you can see the exile starting to take its toll on the good old Doctor. He's sarcastic and patronising to figures in authority like Sir James and General Carrington, but also gets to show his suaveness with the disappearing tape trick that only Pertwee, I feel, could pull off very well. It is funny, but it doesn't undermine our believability in the Doctor's character. A similar moment also comes when he pretends to be a crazy old fool who needs help with his car in order to reobtain the hijacked space capsule. Again, it's funny, but it's still cool for this Doctor's character and doesn't undermine him in any way. Now, rewatching the Third Doctor just throughout Season 7, I'm genuinely surprised that the new Doctor was written as a bit unlikable, but I also think that that is an advantage, as there aren't any unfavourable comparisons between him and the previous Doctor, Patrick Troughton, as Troughton felt like your mad cuddly uncle, whereas Pertwee feels like more of your crazy granddad who wants to feel young and wants all the latest gadgets and technology. For my Jon Pertwee moment of the week, I'm going with the cliffhanger to episode 2. Yep, it's the
Right, cut it open.
reason I'm choosing this as my favourite is because on paper it sounds like one of those cliffhangers that realise, 25 minutes are up, we need to end the episode now. But the random questions that the Doctor gives the recording of Van Leyden just builds up the tension until he utters, right, cut it open. There's so much conviction said in the delivery, and it just makes the mystery and build-up all the more brilliant. I think viewers may have been sat there wondering for a week what on earth could be inside the capsule, and for me it always gives me shivers and ranks as one of Doctor Who's best cliffhangers. Liz Shaw still proves to be a very competent companion. However, I feel the character does become a bit of a damsel in distress when she's kidnapped in episodes 3 and 4. But I don't feel this undermines her in any way, as she's not being used for leverage or a hostage situation. She is being used by the henchmen because of her intelligence, so I don't think it undermines her or devolves her character down. I did enjoy her scenes with Dr. Lennox, convincing him to go to UNIT with information regarding the aliens. While she is held hostage for the most part, she still remains a strong character in my opinion. And as for the Brigadier, he is an absolute badass in this story, proving to be such a great action star. His smoothest moment for me comes in the warehouse fight in episode 1, when he and the enemy sergeant corner each other. Neither can miss at that range, but the Brigadier is cool and collected and argues that if he is shot, his men will kill the sergeant in retaliation. The Brigadier could die at any moment there, but he shows his courage and bravery. You get that there's so much experience and action behind this man. I also like how his loyalty and friendship to the Doctor is tested, as the Doctor is going beyond authority, but the Brigadier will risk going outside protocol as he trusts the Doctor to do the right thing. And I like how their relationship develops over their first season together. In Spearhead from Space, the Brigadier is unsure whether to trust the Doctor, as he now has a completely different face, and in the Silurians they clash over what's best for the Earth, peace or war. But by this story, the friendship has mellowed out, and they have become more trusting of each other, I think. The villains this week are a pretty interesting one. From the title, you'd assume that the alien ambassadors are the villains, but you'd be wrong here, as the villain is none other than humanity. General Carrington I find to be a pretty interesting antagonist. He landed on Mars years ago with his fellow astronaut Jim Daniels, and they encountered the aliens. However, not realising that their touch was fatal to humans, they accidentally killed his friend Daniels. Carrington believes that the aliens were a threat to the Earth and wants to use them to start an interplanetary war. I like how his racism and prejudice is his motivation, as you do understand where he's coming from. And I like how he wants the world to be scared of the aliens to start a war. It's like he wants everyone to get on his side. Furthermore, while the episode never outright states it, you could make the argument that Carrington suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. I like how he's not a completely black and white character, but similar to the aliens, he's also wearing a mask, as beneath the authority figure is a damaged character who believes it's his moral duty to fight the aliens. Though my main problem with Carrington does come with how he's used. In episode 1, it's pretty obvious he's the villain, yet the big reveal comes at the end of episode 6, even though we, the audience, already know this, despite the episode treating it as some massive twist that we didn't see coming. Yeah, you can't have it both ways, guys. Finally, his defeat is pretty underwhelming. They simply surround him and he goes down without a fight. In fact, it was going to be a darker ending for General Carrington. In the original script, he was going to be sent to an insane asylum, but they may have cut it because even then that might have been too far for a family show. His henchman Regan, played by William Dysart, is a pretty stereotypical sidekick, as he doesn't have much motivation on why he's helping Carrington, but the performance I think really brings it to life. His glee when he realises how indestructible the aliens are is great. You just love to hate him. There's not much to his character, but the performance is what really brings it to life. There's so much grittiness in his actions, such as disposing of the dead henchman in the gravel pit. While the scene may go on for a bit long, it shows how far he will go to cover his tracks. Plus I like his quip about using the aliens to rob Fort Knox. I wonder if that was a reference to Goldfinger. Interesting fact about Regan, he was originally going to be Irish, but was dropped after the recent riots in Northern Ireland had occurred, and they didn't want to show the Irish wield a powerful new weapon in Aliens. Ouch. The supporting cast are also pretty good. I really like Ralph Cornish, played by Ronald Allen, as he not only cares for the operation of the Space Centre running smoothly as possible, but he is concerned for the safety of his staff and astronauts. We all need a boss like Cornish. While he initially finds the Doctor irritating, he comes to trust him over the course of the story, and he provides such a warmness to the massive and corporate-looking Space Control Centre. I do like the misguidedness of Sir James Quinlan. He wants to use the aliens for a political coup of making first contact and wanted fame and glory. He's not exactly a bad man, but he underestimated how dangerous both the aliens and Carrington are, and his ambition proved to be his downfall as he is killed by the aliens. Reporter John Wakefield, played by Michael Wisher, is also a very welcome addition. Whenever he's on screen, Wisher's eyes always seem to be looking at an off-screen autocue. However, that's intentional, and it keeps the space control disaster grounded in reality and the world being aware of these events. It was a pretty good touch, and I don't think they needed to add it, but it was really nice to have. The alien ambassadors are also an interesting concept. I like how they're a peaceful race who are willing to cooperate with humanity, but they are willing to fight if their ambassadors are not returned to them. The only problem is their touch is deadly to humans, and they may seem grotesque looking and mysterious, but they are a peace-loving race. Their voices by Peter Halliday are also really effective. While they do sound a bit too similar to the Silurians, they are distinctly alien enough. The imagery of the spacesuit is also really effective. I'm a firm believer in less is more, and the fact that we don't see much of them is what makes them so chilling in my opinion. Plus, when you think about it, it links to Carrington's plans: keep the raids public but have the perpetrators be mysterious in order to evoke panic and chaos in the unknown for the military and the public. I love how there's shades of grey to the characters and the aliens. You think you can trust or mistrust them to start with, but as the story goes on, the characters behind the masks is revealed. It's indicative of how this new era is tackling themes of racism, prejudice, and how nothing is black and white as it seems anymore. A step in the right direction in my opinion. Production-wise, the budget is very much on screen. The action scenes are superb, almost 50 years later. This was their first use of Havoc, a stunt agency, and I'm glad they used them here. There are plenty of fistfights, gunfights, motorbike chases, car chases, and even a fight on a helicopter. It's all really effective and just adds to the scale of this new action-adventure era. Michael Ferguson is a brilliant director as he creates some gorgeous shots, such as the alien silhouetted against the sunset and slowly walking to the guard who's shooting and firing at it, but it's completely ineffective, unstoppable. It's genuinely chilling to watch. The model work is also top-notch with the space probes and the alien spacecraft, and the music by Dudley Simpson is also pretty sublime. The theme used for the aliens is great. It sounds so powerful, mysterious and unknown, which is what the alien characters are, as we don't know their true intentions until later in the story. The theme for Unit is also great, very militaristic and British, and if Unit ever had a spin-off series on TV, they should have used that music. Now, speaking of music, this is the first story to use the iconic sting for each episode ending, a trait that sticks around even today. Plus, I don't know whose idea it was, but the opening titles are split with an episode reprise, and then the title comes in with a twang used for Of Death. It's a shame this was only used once, and I think it's a really effective and flashy way to introduce the story and gets me excited whenever I start watching the Ambassadors of Death. And who knows, maybe they'll bring it back for Series 12. If I do have problems with the Ambassadors of Death, it would be its length. For 7 episodes, I think it's quite padded, especially in episode 4, as there's not really enough plot to fill an egg cup in my opinion. Liz is captured, then she escapes, then she's recaptured again, and not much has been done to advance the plot. By the end of the episode, the Doctor comes to the conclusion that the astronauts are alien replacements, but it's painfully obvious that they're not human. In my opinion, this would have worked better as a 6-parter, as I feel it's just too long for 7. As mentioned before, I do find the ending a bit too flat and ineffective, and it kind of gives off the impression that the budget had run out for an explosive climax. So, in conclusion, The Ambassadors of Death is an action-packed, gritty story that's superbly directed with great performances, themes, and an interesting use of human villains as opposed to the aliens being the antagonists. While it is too long and probably has too much going on or not much going on in terms of story, it's still an entertaining watch and an underrated gem from the Third Doctor's era. final story, originally intended to close off Doctor Who's 7th season, was The Mists of Madness from writer Brian Riott. Some months later, though, he jumped ship on the episode when he accepted an academic writing post in Bristol, meaning he couldn't complete his script. With a now empty slot, script editor Terence Dix approached husband and wife writing team Charlotte and Dennis Plimmer to write The Shadow People, but was subsequently abandoned due to a paid dispute between the Plimmers and the BBC. The other option was for Dix to approach an old colleague of his, Don Horton, who had previously worked on Crossroads with Terence Dix. Horton found his idea from an American project to drill more than 5 kilometres through the Earth's mantle in the Pacific Ocean. The project was soon abandoned, and Horton rang the American embassy to inquire why, but the information couldn't be revealed as it was top secret. Seriously, look this mission up, it was real. The story then went ahead with a working title of The Mole Hole Project in November 1969. Other working titles included Operation Mole Bore and The Mole Bore. Producer Barry Letts requested that there be a monster for the Doctor to face, resulting in the inclusion of the Primords, and a type of alien karate for the Doctor to use in hand-to-hand combat. Originally titled Feltian, it was then changed to Venusian Karate. Veteran Doctor Who director Douglas Camfield was assigned to direct and made the decision to have the Primords appear as werewolves rather than ape-like creatures as they were written in the script. It was also Camfield's decision to bring back John Levine as Sergeant Benton, who, as a newcomer to the acting business, would be able to show off his versatility as an actor. Think of it this way, he plays Benton from our universe, Benton in the parallel universe, and a Primord. And now that I think about it, he was playing the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I think John Levine owes a lot to Camfield, as he gave him the opportunity to show off his range all in one story. I wish all directors were like that. In late February, the story was retitled to Project Inferno, and it was around this time that Barry Letts was informed by the BBC that the 7th season had been successful enough to be renewed for an 8th season, with John Pertwee and Nicholas Courtney being contracted as regulars. Sadly, one regular who would not be returning was Caroline John as Liz Shaw, as Letts felt that the character was not suitable enough to be a surrogate for the audience, and by coincidence Caroline John was now pregnant and would not likely have been available for season 8 anyway. Location filming began at the end of March, with the only venue being used was Bury Wiggins & Co., an oil refinery situated near Strood in Kent, which served as the Inferno drill compound for both universes, and filming lasted until April 3rd. On the final day, however, an accident occurred when Pertwee, driving Bessie, hit stuntman Alan Chunce while recording the chase scene. Chunce needed 18 stitches in his leg, but was determined to return to work and not let it deter John Pertwee, who felt massively guilty about it. First recording session covered Thursday, April 23rd and Friday the 24th, and was devoted to episodes 1 and 2. However, because so much of these instalments had been completed on film, Camfield elected to use the first day entirely for camera rehearsals, confining recording only to the Friday. Unfortunately, things didn't go well on this day. John Pertwee would not follow Douglas Camfield's directions, and when the star argued with production assistant Chris Doyley John, an irate Douglas Camfield descended from the production gallery, forcing Sheila Dunn, his wife, to intervene and persuade John Pertwee to comply. Things would come to a head during rehearsals on episode 3, at the start of the following week. By this time, Caroline John was also unhappy because Courtney had convinced Douglas Camfield and Barry Letts that it should be the brigade leader who interrogates the Doctor in Part 3, rather than section leader Shaw. As tensions were mounting on the 27th of April, Douglas Camfield collapsed during rehearsals, forcing production assistant Chris Doyley John to summon Barry Letts. Sheila Dunn, Douglas Camfield's wife, revealed that her husband was suffering from a heart murmur, and it was agreed that Camfield should be removed from Inferno to safeguard his health, and he even insisted that he go on, despite looking like absolute death apparently. Letts' first inclination was to hire a new director to finish the story, but because Camfield had already completed much of the planning for the final 5 episodes, Barry Letts decided to take over directing the story himself, as he had previously helmed The Enemy of the World 2 years earlier. With Barry Letts now in charge, recording resumed on May 7th and 8th, which were again a Thursday and Friday. Work on these concentrated on episodes 3 and 4, as well as some material from Part 6. Exactly 2 weeks later, episode 5 was taped alongside the remainder of episode 6 over May 21st and May 22nd. John Pertwee had a rare opportunity to play a different role during this recording session, as he pre-recorded the announcer's voice, performed in an imitation of Nazi propagandist William Joyce, heard over the brigade leader's radio in episode 5. Cast and crew then returned to Studio 3 for the final episode, which was taped on Friday, May 29th, 1970, completing both the serial and the recording block. In post-production, however, Barry Letts became concerned that Pertwee's voice on the radio was too recognisable and cut this segment from episode 5. However, it would be retained on the prints sold internationally, and you can even find it on the DVD release. Inferno also marked the end of Caroline John's regular involvement in Doctor Who, and the start of a lengthy hiatus in her acting career, while she basically retired to raise her family with husband Geoffrey Beevers. Caroline John returned to the acting profession in the early 80s with an appearance in the Barry Letts produced version of The Hound of the Baskervilles, starring 4th Doctor Tom Baker as Sherlock Holmes. She also reprised her role as Liz on several occasions, on TV in both The Five Doctors and Dimensions in Time, and in the Probe direct-to-video series. She made her debut with Big Finish Productions playing Madame Salvador in the 7th Doctor audio drama Dust Breeding, before making several appearances as Liz for the company in their Companion Chronicles range, beginning with The Bluetooth. Caroline John continued to appear in a variety of television and movie projects, such as the feature film Love Actually, prior to her death from cancer on June 5, 2012. The story begins with UNIT providing security cover at an experimental drilling project designed to penetrate the Earth's crust and release an untapped source of energy. Soon, however, the drill head starts to leak an oily green liquid that transforms those who touch it into vicious primeval creatures with a craving for heat. The Doctor is accidentally transported by the partially repaired TARDIS console into a parallel universe where the drilling project is at a more advanced stage. Thwarted by his friends' ruthless alter egos, the Doctor works to save both universes as the Earth begins to scream. 7 years into Doctor Who's history, and they finally tackle the idea of parallel universes. But Season 7 made a point of pushing those boundaries and tackling new ideas and themes, despite being entirely set on Earth. Inferno has earned a well-earned reputation as one of the best Third Doctor stories, and I most certainly agree. If you saw my top 5 Third Doctor stories video, which incidentally you can find right here, please give it a watch. In keeping with Season 7's tone, this is one of the darker stories in Doctor Who's history, and in my opinion, it's all the better for it. Jon Pertwee is simply phenomenal in this story, and I think this is the Third Doctor at his most vulnerable, despite being one of the more suave and confident incarnations. He really is put through hell in this story. He's surrounded by authority figures like Professor Stahlman, who won't listen to him. Then while trying to get his TARDIS working, he's thrown into a parallel universe where the UK is a fascist dictatorship and all of his allies like Liz Shaw and the Brigadier are evil and ruthless. To add to his problems, the drilling project on the parallel Earth reaches penetration point and the Earth is about to become a fiery ball of flame as it was billions of years ago. While the Doctor is put through hell, Pertwee maintains his confidence throughout, and it still fits the story. It doesn't make the threat the Doctor goes through irrelevant or undermines it in any way, but it gives us confidence and reassurance in the Doctor's character, that he's the most intelligent man in the room, and you don't deny for a second that he's the Doctor. My Jon Pertwee moment of the week is easily the cliffhanger to Part 4. Trapped in a parallel Earth and seconds to go before they reach the Earth's core, the Doctor shouts for them to stop the drilling before it's too late, and that the Earth is screaming its rage at them. Pertwee is simply brilliant here. There's so much conviction in his delivery, but the reason this is my favourite moment is, despite being a scientist, it shows that the Doctor has his limits when it comes to interfering with nature, and the Doctor stands up for all living things, even planets that can't really speak to us. Throughout Season 7, Pertwee proved to be a very worthy successor to Patrick Troughton, and I think his performance was the main reason Doctor Who was able to survive into the 1970s. Caroline John gives one last great performance as Liz Shaw, though I personally feel that the real Liz Shaw doesn't really get much to do in this story. She spends most of the story just waiting for the Doctor to come back. However, her performance as Section Leader Shaw in the parallel universe is really good. She makes the two versions very distinct from one another. I really like the arc the parallel Liz undergoes. She starts off as someone who blindly follows orders and believes in the system that she's serving. However, once the Doctor arrives and the energies of the Earth's core are released, she becomes a better person and helps the Doctor to save our own Earth. And I like how she willingly helps the Doctor, knowing that it will do nothing to help her, and even though the Brigade leader demands that the Doctor save them as well, she shoots him, as the Doctor says that the consequences will be disastrous if their parallel selves met one another. She sees that the Doctor has been right about all the events that occurred, so she trusts him to leave them behind, basically to burn to death and save the Earth. Coming back to our Earth, I do find it a shame that Liz was never really given a goodbye scene, and the only explanation of why she left is because she was tired of passing the Doctor test tubes and telling him how brilliant he is. I mean, I call bullshit on that, because Liz was a great companion and did far more than that. Nicholas Courtney is also fantastic as the Brigadier and the Brigade Leader. As the Brigadier, like Liz, he doesn't have much to do other than simply wait for the Doctor to come back. However, I do like how he does show concern for the Doctor's safety, and it really shows how their relationship has grown over Season 7. As the Brigadier, I love the moment when he orders Benton to get Professor Stahlman, even when he refuses. I love the "a chance to use your initiative, Sergeant." It shows the Brigadier isn't messing around when it comes to disobeying orders. As for the Brigade Leader, he's also fantastic and comes across as genuinely terrifying. He shouts a lot, and this could have easily come across as hammy or too over the top, but Nicholas Courtney absolutely pulls it off. When he's interrogating the Doctor, he's genuinely intimidating and very clearly an extremely dangerous man. Unlike Liz Shaw, the Brigade Leader isn't really changed by the Doctor's presence, and if Liz becomes more accepting of her fate, the Brigade Leader becomes increasingly desperate and as savage as the Primords, despite not turning into one himself. When you think about it, he's given a quick death rather than being burnt alive when shot in the back by Liz Shaw. Nicholas Courtney is simply amazing in both roles, and there's a good reason why Inferno is his favourite story. The supporting cast in this are also great. Olaf Pooley as Professor Stahlman is more or less your typical mad scientist, but the performance is still strong as you really grow to hate how the man just won't listen to anyone. Furthermore, he slowly becomes a Primord over the course of the story, and his obsession to see the drilling project succeed just exacerbates the problem. Derek Newark as Greg Sutton is also really good, as he feels like the most down-to-earth character amongst all the madness. I love his clashes with Stahlman, even saying he can blow himself to Kingdom Come. He doesn't use scientific words, he basically says how it is and doesn't care what people think of his opinion. I like how his parallel version clashes with the dictatorship he lives in, thinking it's all pointless even when the world is going up in flames, and even helps the Doctor to get back to his own Earth, even if it means he has no hope of survival. But I even like how accepting he is of the apocalypse and chooses to spend it as far away from the compound as possible. I do like his relationship with Petra, played by Sheila Dunn. At the start, she's pretty much a passive character, following orders from Stahlman and never questioning him. However, Greg convinces her to open her mind and not just be a mindless zombie to a fascist dictatorship. Petra is probably the most scared when it comes to the Earth going up in flames, but she doesn't just scream in terror, and she helps the Doctor fix the TARDIS so he can get back to our Earth. Christopher Benjamin as Sir Keith is also great. He's more or less the lighter version of Stahlman. He is passionate about the drilling project, but when things become dangerous, he will find a way to put a stop to it if he can. Also, he's totally a descendant of Henry Gordon Jago from the Talons of Weng-Chiang. Performances from every actor, I think, are brilliant. They are all on top form here. In fact, one recurring aspect I like from all of them is that they all have to shout because the drilling is so loud and is constantly in the background as noise. It's such a small touch, but it works so well to add to the enormity of the situation, and just top marks to all the actors for being able to pull it off so well. Primords themselves have come under their fair share of criticism from audiences and fans. Some feel that they look too silly or weren't needed as a monster, as the Earth blowing up was more than enough for a threat. Me personally, I think the makeup work is really good, and I love how they look like werewolves. The only part of the makeup that I think lets it down are the fake teeth. Yeah, they look like vampire teeth you'd find in the Halloween section at Asda. But their growls and sound effects are pretty good. They sound similar to the way the Earth Scream sound effect is used that Stahlman hears in his head. We don't know much about the Primords, but I personally think that they inhabited the Earth when it was too hot for humans to live in billions of years ago, and I think that's what makes them all the more terrifying. The scientists think that they'll move forward and revolutionise science as we know it, but we're simply going to regress back to the primordial slime. I doubt the Primords are going to go down as memorable monsters, but they're still effective as a monster of the week type villain. Production-wise, this story gets top marks for pretty much everything. The location work is absolutely brilliant, and it's great that the stunt team took full advantage of it. The falls and jumps are incredible, and there was no CGI back then, so all the jumps you see, they were 100% real. The location is just so dank and miserable, and you genuinely believe that the end of the world could occur here. Camfield really knows how to make the compound look gigantic, and there's many a reason why he's my favourite director of Doctor Who. The music is also pretty interesting, as this was the last story to use stock music as opposed to a composer writing original music. It works well in the chase scene, as it adds to the confusion the Doctor must be feeling when waking up from materialising and finding people shooting at him. However, a lot of the time music isn't used, but I think that's a good thing, as it adds to the realism of the Earth ending and going up in flames, and sometimes you don't need dramatic music to enhance the drama. The actors' performances is sometimes more than enough. The CSO effects are dodgy in areas, but its use in the episode 6 cliffhanger is pretty effective, as the lava crawls towards the hut, and it's such an amazing cliffhanger. The drill head set is pretty good as well, and certainly feels enormous and is really effective. The sound effects are great, especially the ringing that Stallman hears when he slowly becomes a Primord. It's like the primordial Earth is waking up and ready to burn the Earth once more, and it's chilling to listen to. If there's anything I don't like about Inferno, it's the final episode where I think the tension kind of deflates for me. We spend episodes 5 and 6 seeing the consequences of humanity's actions, but the tension kind of goes when we go back to our own world. Plus we can kind of predict that the Doctor will stop the drilling before it's too late. But if anything, I'm just nitpicking. I still think Inferno is phenomenal. So, to conclude, Inferno is a tension-filled, excellently acted, darkly themed story with great characters and brilliant pacing. This is one of those stories that I could watch from start to finish and never feel bored by it. It's wonderfully grim and dark, and it's such an edge-of-your-seat type of story, and is easily the best story from the Third Doctor's era. Well everyone, that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to like, share and subscribe. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Inferno. Is it your favourite Third Doctor story? And if not, what is? I hope you enjoyed looking back on Season 7 as much as I have, because it's been great. And I shall see you all next time for more videos. Goodbye.